Our primary election is right around the corner, coming up on March 17th, and Chicago needs election judges. You can help your neighbors cast their votes by going to pollworker.chicagoelections.gov. You do have to be a U.S. citizen and a registered voter in Cook County, but you can earn $230 for your service. Plus, if you're bilingual in Spanish, Hindi, Polish, Korean, Chinese, or Tagalog, then they definitely need your help. To learn more and apply, head to pollworker.chicagoelections.gov or call 312-269-7984. If you're looking for a place to slide for spring break, maybe check out South by Southwest 2026 when it drops in Austin, Texas this March 12th through the 18th. You can expect the unexpected where innovation, film and TV, music, and culture collide. Plus, you'll hear from global thought leaders, experience unforgettable screenings, and maybe catch a future favorite artist all in one week. The 2026 South by Southwest conferences and festivals are a city-wide experience, and you lucky because our friends over at CityCast Austin have everything you need to maximize your time in the city. Start planning your adventure and unlock a 10% discount on your innovation badge when you use code CityCast10 at sxsw.com/Chicago. Discount on badge price only, not combinable, and terms apply. Today on CityCast Chicago, what Illinois got wrong about legal weed, plus what's going on in Springfield this week. It's Monday, February 16th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. We've got executive producer Simone Alisea in the building with us. How you feeling, Simone?
Hey, Jacoby. I'm all right. How are you?
Always a good time when you're here. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah Cooper with the Chicago Reporter. Thank you for making time today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All of our stories today take us to Springfield in some form or fashion. So, Simone, what are you watching this week?
Yeah, obviously we are in the early middle of the legislative session in Springfield. And of course, there is lots of activity going on. One thing that I wanted to focus on was what lawmakers are calling the Power Act. And this is legislation surrounding these hyperscale data centers. You and I had a long conversation about this last week, so I won't go too deep into sort of the what these are and what's going on. But suffice it to say that AI needs a lot of data and is looking to build data centers, not only more of them, but also much larger ones that take up a lot more energy, a lot more water, that kind of thing. And lawmakers are sort of considering, okay, well, what kinds of new regulation should we be putting on these data centers, both as they are built and also as they operate? And so the Power Act kind of focuses on three main things. It focuses on energy use, water use, and also pollution. On the energy use front, it would require data centers to pay for their own energy costs, including any infrastructure needed to generate that energy. It also has requirements around new energy coming from renewable resources, which I know is a big concern, that if the energy needs grow, that all of a sudden that means like more coal and stuff is going to come back online to service that energy need. And then it also legislates that these data centers cannot shift those energy costs to residents, which has been a big concern even among the data centers that already exist in Illinois, of which there are many, of which there are a lot. On water usage, it would be more about transparency. So they would have to report on their water usage. Right now, there's basically no regulation that around, like, they don't have to tell us how much water they're using. And so that would be a requirement under this new legislation. They'd also have to get water permits from the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. And then on the pollution front, this is another bit that I think is interesting. It would require environmental assessments before these, I think both ongoing and also before they're built, but also for new data centers coming online, there would also be requirements for community benefits agreements. And also data centers would have to pay into something called a public benefits and affordability fund, which would essentially go to help mitigate issues created by data centers in the actual communities where they're situated. And so a couple of lawmakers, announced this last week. So it is sort of just being introduced and debated. But it's interesting because the primary sponsors, at least of the Senate proposal, the primary sponsors are from Chicago and the proximate Chicago suburbs, where currently we don't have data centers exactly. Most of the data centers that have been built in Illinois are in more the Collier counties, kind of like outside direct proximity to Chicago. So I'm curious to hear more from those lawmakers in those communities where data centers are already being situated.
Mm-hmm. Of those three major tent poles of the legislation, my biggest concern is how strong will lawmakers be to keep in environmental assessment and CBAs, because something we've covered in our years is corporations, new developments, they're not big fans of CBAs. They're not always willing to come to the table to negotiate. And if people are wondering,
or they're not willing to put it in writing per se.
Right.
That's, I think, a key bit with the CBA is sort of like, this is a contract that you're being held to.
Exactly. Because a lot of those promises in terms of displacement or jobs coming to the neighborhood, like a lot of times in big developments, those don't pan out, and having it in writing, gives people a some form of accountability. And, if people are wondering why Governor Pritzker at times seems a little tepid or riding the fence on this, it's because as early as, a few months into his first term, he passed legislation to court data centers. He wants this new investment.
Illinois has been offering tax incentives to new data centers since 2019.
Yeah, to nearly $1 billion. And my concern is, how strong will this legislation be by the time it potentially gets to the governor's desk, seeing as how he's kind of playing both sides of the fence here. He talked at a meeting last Monday, and he said, if these things are driving up rates, we're going to have to slow things down and let people know that they're going to have to pay their fair share, as if he's just learning about this in recent months or as this legislation has come up. This is something him and his office is fully aware of. And so I'm interested to see how they play this in the coming months.
My background, actually, my education is in environmental reporting, and obviously it's something that I care deeply about. But I think when you're talking about this topic too, and you're trying to get the average person to be engaged with it, like the thing to highlight is the energy rate increases. Like that is coming directly out of the pockets of people living in Illinois, living in the Chicago area, and that's
we're already feeling it.
Yeah,
our rates have already gone up.
Mm-hmm.
There, I believe, is like a nationwide study that's identified like 70% of increased electricity costs from 2024 were due to data centers, and so that is something that is like immediately affecting people and gives a good reason to be really plugged into this issue. I think it's something everyone needs to be paying attention to.
Yeah, Jacoby, I think the other thing to watch in Springfield, I almost don't want to bring it up because I'm kind of done talking about it. I'm over it, is the Bears and the stadium and everything playing out pretty much beat for beat.
Exactly as we've called it.
Oh my gosh. I'm so over this story, Jacoby. I'm so over it.
The moment they got a little bit of success under their belt, we knew this.
I would have happened even if they weren't that successful, though, Jacoby. It would have happened either way.
But I knew that they were going to collide. That's my point.
Yes.
I knew that these moments would collide. After the Bears announced a willingness to move to Indiana, they have set off a 3-state fight for the team, all with the presumed goal of landing in Arlington Heights with nearly $1 billion in
the property that they bought, they purchased
in February of 2023. Always with the plan of building a stadium that they owned. They have always said they were committing $2 billion to the plan and needed state money. But for the last few years, all you have really gotten out of lawmakers is, we're not going to build a new stadium. The studies show that cities, townships, people, the fans, they don't win on new stadium projects, right? The jobs
public money. That's the trick. Is like, we're not going to pony up more money while we're still paying off Soldier Field, right? Not to keep anticipating you, but now
no, it's all good. We've been talking about this for so long, but after Indiana legislators basically wrote a blank check for the Bears, Gary, Portage, Hammond, Indiana have all pitched these $1 billion developments. Iowa is trying to get in on the scramble, and now, right, the tone has shifted away from, we're not giving public money to $1 billion stadiums, to, we were always willing to give $1 billion to sewage and water improvements and construction changes and the infrastructure needed, right? Improve the local metro station. Everyone seems a little softer on the Bears.
But not just that. It's, I think, right, the infrastructure, there was always going to be public money for infrastructure. That's just true for any development, any major development. There's always going to be a little bit of public money for infrastructure changes around that. What the other thing here is that the Bears want property tax relief in Arlington Heights, and they've been beefing with Arlington.
Negotiate a long-term property fix, and they don't want annual assessments. They don't want their rates to keep going up, while everyone surrounding this stadium is going to have to pay the increases that come with this $1 billion complex plopped middle of Arlington Heights.
That's the whole point of improving the property, is the property tax goes up. That's the whole point.
And now local officials from the Arlington Heights mayor, the Rolling Meadows mayors, they're out there doing the Brandon Johnson cheerleading effort. They held a rally last week that was saying, wake up, Springfield. We can't lose them to Indiana. It's all about civic pride now. But again, the biggest frustration always and will remain, this was never about fan experience. This was never about all of this, BS, greater Chicagoland Bears pride nonsense. This was always about a $1 billion team getting their $1 billion stadium. So the leverage they have been seeking for 3 years, they finally got it. And all the lawmakers are really armed with right now is we're going to fight to make sure everyday families can afford to go to the games. That's all they got now, and likely to hand over $1 billion for this project. So,
I mean, also the thing is again, the difference between Soldier Field and Arlington Heights is they rent at Soldier Field. It's a lease agreement, and don't get me wrong, that lease agreement doesn't expire until the 2030s. But it is a lease, right? And they own this property in Arlington Heights. So of course you're going to build they were going to build something there. They're not just sitting on that.
We all knew this was coming. And so it's watching it in real time, watching everyone sort of cower to the moment and put the leverage back in the Bears' hands. It's been a spectacle.
I don't know if the listeners are as tired of this story as I am. If you want us to stop talking about this until they actually move, text us 773-780-0246.
Why not keep the Valentine's Day vibes going for another week? I'm talking a romantic Sunday afternoon at one of Chicago's best piano concerts with a mimosa or Manhattan slushie in your hand, and you getting all of that inside the former 7-Eleven off Clark and Belle Plaine. Yes, the one across from Graceland. The venue is now called The Checkout, and it's from Access Contemporary Music. The next concert is February 22nd, featuring rock star pianist Wen-Ting Shi, who is performing the ultimate masterpiece. Yes, B minor sonata from Franz Liszt. And if you ask a classical music nut like myself, for just $20, that's already worth the price of admission. But that's just the first part of the show. She is also jumping into their American and Russian composer bags as well. And on top of that, you can get 20% off when you use promo code PIANO. You're welcome. You could do it at thecheckout.org. Solo piano spotlight at the checkout. Beautiful music, unexpected vibes, and yes, adult slushies. That's code PIANO at thecheckout.org. Look, if your heat has been running more than it should be, it could be because your windows aren't really doing what they're supposed to, and they're letting the heat out and the cold in. Admittedly, I'm sitting in front of a draft right now myself and probably should take my own advice, because the pros at Window Nation can help us get new, energy-efficient windows at a great price, especially because they're having a buy four, get four free deal right now. Plus, they're going to throw in an extra 10% off for Valentine's Day. What's more romantic than popping out with some new windows, right? That's on top of 0 down, 0 monthly payments, and 0 interest for 2 years. Replace your old drafty windows with high quality custom ones from Window Nation. And don't wait. Schedule a fast free estimate now at windownation.com. Staying with Springfield, Sarah, it's been almost 7 years since Illinois passed their recreational weed bill, and folks are saying it's past time to make some changes. Let's start at the very beginning. Why was our cannabis law touted as the most equitable legalization bill at the time it passed? How was it supposed to work?
Yeah, so to set some context, Illinois was the 11th state to legalize cannabis, but it did so in kind of a unique way. Whereas previous states had done it through voter referendum, this came through the state legislature. So we had kind of a unique opportunity here to shape a really equity focused framework at the state level when cannabis was being legalized. And so J.P. Pritzker, he wanted to do that in three ways. One, through criminal records relief, as soon as the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, the CRTA, was signed, about 700,000 people became eligible for records expungement. The second way was through reinvesting in communities that have been historically disadvantaged by the war on drugs. There's a program called the R3 program, Restore, Reinvest, Renew, that distributes grants to organizations that work in areas that have high levels of poverty and crime, and it gets those funds through the taxes from cannabis. About 25% of taxes from cannabis go to this R3 program. And the third one, which has been the focus of my reporting and which has received the most scrutiny, is creating opportunities for people from historically disadvantaged backgrounds to participate in the burgeoning cannabis industry. And this was done by establishing a program that was supposed to prioritize people from who had either been affected personally by cannabis prohibition, people who have had family members who have been affected by cannabis prohibition, or people who come from areas that, similar to the R3 program, have certain indicators of poverty and violence and high arrest rates related to cannabis. And so this framework, this program, was really supposed to provide a leg up for these individuals once cannabis licenses were distributed, to be able to get those licenses. And alongside that, it was also intentioned to provide some resources to help these entrepreneurs, discounts on the application fees, the application costs themselves, and then also establishing a program called the Social Equity Loan Program that provides loans to these qualifying individuals in order to offset some of the difficulties that people face in getting funding to establish businesses where, cannabis is still illegal at the federal level. So there's a lot of hurdles in place. So that was the intention of the program as it was signed into law back in 2019. And it was, like I said, a big step forward in some ways compared to what other states had been able to do, because it was enacted through the state legislature and set a pretty ambitious goal in place to create, as it was championed, the most equitable cannabis regulation to that point.
If you had to give the state's rollout a grade, what would it be and why? What have been the biggest issues with the law's implementation?
Yeah, well, the rollout is really where you see a lot of the fiercest criticism. And, frankly, I've kind of given a failing grade. There was a lot of interest in getting cannabis licenses, specifically for dispensary licenses, when applications opened in late 2019. And they saw a flood of applications. Well over 2,000 applications were submitted from about 900 different individuals or companies. And this is where things got really problematic for folks who were trying to apply under a social equity license. For one thing, these applications were expensive. And the way that applications were awarded, you scored each application, and then the top scoring applicants ended up going in this lottery. And
What were they scored on?
They were scored on, there's a long list of criteria. Applicants who have, again, certain characteristics related to the social equity components were that was a big part of the scoring. There were also stipulations about the viability of your business, things like that.
So they looked at your financials.
Yeah,
they looked at how closely the war on drugs impacted you and your family.
Yeah, but the scoring criteria, again, it was meant to give a leg up to people who are from these social equity qualifying backgrounds. With so many applications, they ended up having just a lot of applicants who had top qualifying scores. So they ended up throwing these into a lottery, which meant people who had more than one application. It kind of became an odds game. And these applications were expensive, even at a discounted rate. It was, I believe, $2,500 for a single application. So when you're talking about a program that is specifically trying to elevate people from, marginalized backgrounds, from areas that have not had as much economic investment, funding is hard to come by. It always is in this industry. And so you have these partnerships that spring up between people who qualify as social equity licensees and, larger like multi-state operators. You see a lot of criticism on multi-state operators when you're talking about legalized cannabis across the country. But really, that gets to the point of concerns about monopolies. And these large multi-state operators that have a lot of resources, that have funding, that already have a foot in the game, squashing out competition from smaller mom and pop shops. And so you kind of have this situation where people are forced to partner up with these larger entities with more resources. And then at the same time, the fact that so many people applied, there were a lot of legal challenges because of there
was only 75 spots really to get.
Yeah, and later on that was expanded to, I believe, 185 licenses were doled out after the first round, but it took over a year. It took until late August, or I believe like August and September of 2021 for people to actually get their licenses. Yeah. And the first social equity licensed businesses did not open up until, I think, like November of that year. So that's almost 2 years after cannabis was legalized for adult use in Illinois. But I want to point out another issue with the rollout that was especially like exacerbated because you have these like delays and people aren't opening up their cannabis businesses, 2 years out. Well, there were still cannabis stores in that like 2 year gap.
Right, and these medical weed got to us in 2013. So there were, like you said, some of these multi-state operators, some of these big dispensaries already here for 6 years before the bill got passed, and then as people are delayed.
Yeah. And so there was this thing called +1 licenses that became available for the existing medical dispensaries. So while people who were newcomers to the market, which is encompassing of these social equity business owners, they were not able to even apply for a license until like late 2019. The existing medical businesses were able to get +1 licenses at either to sell recreational cannabis either at their existing locations or at a new location. And what this meant was these medical companies, which are largely owned by multi-state operators, were able to sell legal adult use cannabis on January 1st, 2020. And they raked in something like $3 million that first day alone. So immediately these stores were able to start operating while people who were applying for social equity licenses were trying to get even just the license to open their business for well over a year. So if you look at a disparity study that was released in 2024, you can see like even though on paper the amount of licensed businesses for adult use cannabis skew far towards the social equity businesses, actually by far the majority of revenue that's coming from cannabis businesses is coming from these, as they say in the report, non-women or minority-owned businesses, which is, largely these multi-state operators who were operating medical dispensaries before the CRTA was passed.
Does the pandemic have anything to do with the delays in licensing for the social equity applicants?
Yeah, it did. That was also a significant cause of delays. It's really, the unforeseeable delays of the pandemic, and then again these lawsuits that were challenging the selection process. I mean, that's why it ended up taking so long as well, because they readjusted the selection criteria, the selection process a few times because there was just a lot of legal challenges.
This law was supposed to help Black and brown folks in neighborhoods across the South and West Side who wanted to break into this industry. We often say, one map of Chicago is the same map. Can you kind of talk about where a lot of the dispensaries are located and efforts to get them into neighborhoods on the South and West Sides, and why have there been such big challenges?
One of the ways that social equity qualified applicants are identified is looking at these quote unquote disproportionately impacted areas. And these are areas that have been identified as disproportionately burdened by the war on drugs. So a lot of the people who are qualifying for social equity licenses, are coming from these neighborhoods. If you look at a map of Chicago and see where the dispensaries are, there's only, I think, like 4 dispensaries that are actually in those social equity neighborhoods. These dispensaries are crowded on the north side. They're crowded, in areas like River North and Lakeview and frankly, more affluent areas. There's multiple reasons for that. I mean, the most obvious being it's kind of where the money is. This is a product that is pretty expensive. Illinois has some of the highest priced cannabis in the country, has some of the highest taxes for cannabis in the country, and it essentially makes this a bit of a luxury good. And the other side of that is there is a degree of community pushback. One of the dispensary operators that I spoke with, Edie Moore, she's opening a location in South Shore, and she had tried to open a medical business like 10 years ago, but as she described it, the community pushback was like visceral. People just didn't want more drugs in their community, essentially. And that kind of gets to an element of education, because I think what's really important to think about here is the medical consumers. And there is significant gaps in access now for people who are like medically licensed card holders or who could potentially qualify for a medical card, where they just can't access like legal cannabis from a legal dispensary without going to a community on the opposite side of the city from where they live.
Although you can kind of see, like, I think that community pushback is really interesting to me, because it does kind of speak to like a lived experience that where you're like then trying to thread the needle of like, how does legalizing and commercializing this change your disposition to it? Because if you've lived on a block, say, where there has been violence because of what's happening in an illicit drug trade, right? What's happening on the streets. And then all of a sudden someone wants to come in and say like, actually, we're going to open this in this storefront right next to you. And it's going to raise your property taxes. And like, this is now a tax, like commercial product. Like, I can kind of see why you'd be like, wait a minute. I thought this was the stuff that was making our block worse. I thought this was the stuff that was making life difficult.
Ton of my family members over the years have said, they making money off of us now, right? They was locking us up. They over policed our neighborhoods. Even if a person was just selling dime bags, right, just to feed their family, right, they was criminal numero uno in the neighborhood. And the idea that, given how high the taxes is and how hard it is to get into this business, that most likely a corporation is going to be making money off of this right up the street. It rubs people the wrong way. A lot of people,
but even just the presence of the drugs themselves, right?
Yeah.
Of this being a thing. I mean, it's the same reason, right, that like people are sometimes wary about the opening of new liquor stores or whatever. Or, it's this it's a vice that is accessible, and does the vice being accessible make the block worse?
Yeah, and the analogy too, like liquor stores, like, is this going to be the new liquor store? That's, I think, very much part of the perception. And again, like, when you have really high taxes and the product itself is so expensive, it's like, if you're in an area that's a food desert, do you necessarily need a cannabis dispensary before you need, more accessible, cheaper, like healthy food or something like that?
Yeah. While this law is not seemingly top of mind for folks in Springfield right now, right? Illinois isn't handcuffed to it. What are some changes folks want to see implemented and amended?
So really the biggest one is being able to sell to medical card holders without having a medical dispensary license. None of the 55 medical dispensaries are operated by a social equity licensee because they were established before that program was even put in place. If you are an adult use, recreational licensed dispensary, you cannot sell to medical card holders at the discounted rates that medical licensed dispensaries can. So at a medical licensed dispensary, those card holders, they don't have to pay the exorbitant taxes, which, like I said before, are some of the highest in the country in Illinois. We have really, really steep taxes for cannabis. So that is a big push that advocates have been trying to make to be able to basically authorize recreational dispensaries to sell tax-free product to medical card holders. And that is something that has been kind of put forward to the legislator for several years now. They've been trying to beat that drum for quite a while.
Anything that's going to bring the price of weed down, I'd be into. I gotta say, as someone who comes from Seattle, and the weed is way cheaper.
Hey, I'm from California, and I can say, if I go home, something that I could buy for like $10 in California,
you know what I'm saying?
It's easily going to cost more than like $30.
Absolutely.
From a dispensary in Illinois.
Absolutely, It is. The prices have gone down since I moved here. So because I moved back here in 2021, so just as a lot of these places were coming online, and the prices have definitely gone down between 2021 and 2026. But we're not there yet. We're not. I know groceries is expensive. Weed's also expensive out here.
It's very expensive. Yeah.
I was curious, Sarah, if in your reporting, if you looked into the connection between Illinois' legal weed industry and some of the struggles there, but also the struggles that are happening in the hemp industry here in Chicago, right? We know City Council had passed a ban on intoxicating hemp products with some exceptions. But of course, we just learned that Mayor Brandon Johnson has vetoed that ban. And, one thing he's citing and one thing he's said is that he's worried about these local business owners who have kind of been left out of the legal weed industry and kind of found another way in through hemp. Now, of course, who knows if the city council is going to override that veto, but I'm curious if this is something in your reporting on the legal weed industry, if you looked into this kind of relationship at all.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic too, because that's something that people from the the cannabis advocacy side of things pointed that you have a lot of competition from intoxicating hemp at gas stations and smoke shops and things like that, which for people who are trying to operate social equity licensed businesses, it makes it more difficult because there's, again, competition from other stores that are able to offer kind of similar products, but without having the taxes attached to that. So actually a lot of people who are business owners in this space are I guess more enthusiastic about having the ban on intoxicating hemp, again, because it's creating more competition for them that's not taxed. So it's really hard to compete with.
Despite that, in many ways, they're very much similar, from the same pool of people, but it's we made it into the weed game. And so sorry.
Yeah, well, and one thing that I also wanted to mention is, if you're talking about the successes or failures of this program, there were some folks who were this has been an abject failure. And some folks who said, and dispensary owners who said, I don't want to call this a failure. I think it's harmful to call it a failure. And you can, on one side of things, look on paper and see that Illinois does have more licensed businesses that are owned by minority and women-owned businesses than any other state. At the same time, if you dig a little bit behind those numbers, how many of those places are operational, much less making money? A lot of these businesses are still in the red. They're not making a profit. And on top of that, if you look at the actual amount of license holders, there's I think like over 100 social equity license holders who have not been able to open their doors yet. So, even if you're talking about these folks as sort of like the ones who made it, like there's still so many barriers that a lot of people are facing to even get to opening day.
And this is my thing. This is on the hemp thing too. This is what I always come back to is like, what if it were just easier to open a legal weed shop? Like, what if it were just easier to get the license, if the regulations, if the taxes weren't so high, if the barrier to entry were for this higher quality, more regulated product, would that maybe help solve some of these issues around hemp businesses that are being destroyed? I don't know.
And I think, when you're talking about what the CRTA ambition to do, it feels like it went part of the way there, but not far enough in that it said, okay, we can make this opportunity for more people from disadvantaged backgrounds to participate in this market who have been, harmed by the war on drugs, but didn't go far enough to actually supply them with the necessary resources to be able to successfully do that. And there are things like regulations, really onerous regulations that just aren't really sensible. Like having to have like a huge vault for your dispensary or on security guards, and they just go on top of the litany of other things that already make it really difficult to operate in this industry.
Well, yeah, because it's weed and not booze, right? Because it's culturally, it's still just there is still a sense that like this is a different type of intoxication that we need to regulate very differently from the way we regulate, again, say alcohol.
Yeah. I mean, it would be kind of crazy to think that if you want to open like a liquor store, you need to have a giant vault to put your product in. But that's how it's treated. And
they do have a lot of security cameras, I guess. Your average liquor store. I feel like a lot of liquor stores I go to have a lot of security cameras.
Yeah, but, to your point, there's even as I'd say like the cultural perception and conversation around cannabis has changed so dramatically in the last like 15 years, there's still a lot of misunderstanding and stigma about it. And I think that, education and trying to change how people just even like think about and talk about this substance, it's critical in order to get laws in place that are actually sensible and empower people to succeed in this business.
I want to give a huge thank you to Sarah Cooper from the Chicago Reporter. You will find links to all of their reporting in our show notes. Sarah, thank you for making time today.
Yeah, really happy to be here. Had a great conversation.
I also want to say thank you to our executive producer, Simone Aliseo.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
Before we get out of here, some good news. Quimby's Bookstore in Wicker Park is home to Show and Tell with Chicago's iconic muralist, artist, and educator, Dorian Sylvain, this Friday from 6:30 to 8. I'm going to drop a link in our show notes. Make sure you bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you can find our daily newsletter, our events calendar. And if you love the work that we're doing, please sign up to become a CityCast Chicago neighbor. For $10 a month or $100 a year, you're going to get access to neighbors-only events, ad-free listening, and of course, you are going to be somebody who is really, really close to my heart because you want me to keep my job. And that means a lot to me. Thank you. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. I'll talk to you then. Peace.